I'll take up its 2 o'clock timed item, which is the allocation of 2019-20 transient occupancy tax fund balance to support tourism mitigation projects on the east side. Erin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Erin Casey here with the County Executive Office, here to present this item to you today. And I will just wait for the PowerPoint to queue up. And as I do that, I'd like to first mention that this item in front of your board today is a long time coming. This is something that the community has been talking about for many years, specifically the Tourism Business Improvement District, first identified in the 2015 Tourism Master Plan as a potential funding source to fund a lot of the priority projects in that document. And then many presentations from that point forward to your board as well as to the community on the TBID, as well as the full package that comes along with it in the form of freed up transient occupancy tax, which is also part of today's item that I will cover with your board as part of the presentation. I'd like to thank the North Lake Tahoe Resort Association, its board, as well as its CEO, Jeffrey Hentz, for their support and guidance in working this through. This is on behalf of them, and they will be ultimately the Owners Association of the TBID, and so it's been a pleasure of mine to work with them on this, as well as Civitas Advisors, Inc. They are the vendor that we have contracted with. They have a lot of experience in forming TBIDs in the state of California. John Lambeth is on the phone and will be available to answer any questions that your board may have. And then I'd also like to extend my gratitude to members of the community who have continued to provide feedback, comments, and help really inform what this looks like today. With that, I plan to present to your board a formation timeline of the TBID itself, as well as provide a little bit of detail on the county's partnership with the North Lake Tahoe Resort Association. I'll also speak to the Tourism Master Plan funding history and transient occupancy tax in eastern Placer County. These are additional funding sources that support the implementation of Tourism Master Plan priorities. I'll also speak to the TBID details and the Management District Plan, which is included in your board packet and is the governing document for the TBID itself. The multi-year agreement with Placer County and the Resort Association, which allocates a percentage of TOT to Eastern Placer and designates the Resort Association as advisor of those funds to your board, specifically to transportation and tourism mitigating services, and then board action. So we have a robust presentation for you here today. TBID formation timeline on December 15th. I brought forward to your board the resolution of intention. That is the first of 3 legal steps that are required to form the district, and your board did approve that resolution on December 15th. We issued a public hearing notice on January 15th of 2021, specifically noting the public meeting that took place in late January and then today's public hearing. We sent that to all businesses that are included in the proposed district. Over 5,000 businesses received that notification of today's public hearing as well as the former public meeting in January. That meeting in January was also held. We received public feedback at that time, and today we're at the final public hearing to form the district itself. I also noted here that assessment collections will begin July 1st of 2021. So there will be time for businesses to prepare to collect those assessments later this year. The Resort Association and Placer County have been partners for a long time, since the early or mid-90s. The Resort Association was created in 1995 in order to implement a destination marketing program, but also recommend infrastructure projects to your board in the form of transportation and other types of investment that serve the tourism-based economy of eastern Placer County. To support that work, the Tourism Master Plan was created in 1996, and it outlined priorities that could be supported with those TOT funds that would be recommended by the Resort Association to your board. That document guided the Resort Association and has continued to do so to this day, and was updated in 2004 and then again in 2015. And as I mentioned in my intro, a TBID was an identified funding source or potential funding source to support priorities outlined in that document. So conversations around a TBID are nothing new for this community. A little bit on TOT funding history. The countywide rate currently is at 8%. There is an additional 2% rate in North Lake Tahoe, or what we refer to as the North Lake Tahoe collection area. That was passed by voters in 1996 and then reauthorized again in 2002 and 2012. Those additional funds are invested specifically in Eastern Placer County only and have supported the types of services around trails, expanded TART service, visitor serving facilities like museums, community spaces, and then recreation, including parks and park facilities. This 2% does sunset in 2022, and we will be working with the community to extend that into the future. We looked at, when the Tourism Master Plan was developed in 2015, it was intended to cover an 8-year period. It identified not only priority projects in tiers 1 and 2, so higher priority projects in tier 1, it also estimated the costs to implement many of these projects. Based on that document and those estimates, we're looking at close to $100 million funding gap over an 8-year period, and that was back in 2015, so we're talking about 2015 dollars. So that is a substantial cost over an 8-year period to invest in our infrastructure and transportation needs in Eastern Placer. In 2019, county staff worked to update that list because we felt that it was somewhat dated, needed to be updated to reflect increased costs for projects, as well as other projects that weren't defined at that point in time when the 2015 document was approved, but had been since through a grant program or other prioritization efforts. The funding gap at this point is actually closer to over $2 million over that 8-year period to fully implement all priorities outlined in the Tourism Master Plan. We expect that the costs to implement that document or priorities within it will continue to increase over time. And I want to add that that document does not include workforce housing. So something that is a high priority for your board. It's incorporated into your critical success factors. It's also a very high priority for our community. And right now it is absent from that document. But we understand that we still have needs there. And we'll need to identify funding in order to meet those needs. Closing the gap. Closing the gap. So we have transient occupancy tax that we spoke about, but that isn't going to be enough to cover that substantial gap. So the Resort Association decided to contract with Civitas Advisors, Inc. They are a firm that specializes in forming TBIDs, not only in the state of California, but in other states that are beginning to embrace this TBID mechanism. And the Civitas began to analyze data from several business industries, including lodging, retail, restaurants, as well as recreation. They also worked with the Resort Association to develop the Management District Plan, which again is the governing document for the TBID and is attached to your board packet today. Over 109 TBIDs have been formed through the state of California. So again, this isn't a new mechanism. This is something that's been in place for some time and exists elsewhere within the state. It is formed through the Property and Business Improvement District Law of 1994. And I want to reiterate that a TBID is an assessment. It is not a tax. And so the approval process is different than it would otherwise be for a tax. Businesses are assessed, and in order to pass the district, it requires a 50+1% vote of the assessed businesses prior to that formation. In order for us to initiate this process and hold the resolution or bring the resolution of intention forward to your board, we had to verify that we had 50+1% petitions to do that, and we were able to do that in December already. The budget for the TBID itself is also identified in the in the Management District Plan, and so it specifically calls out how much money will be generated and then where it will be allocated in future years. The Resort Association is also identified within the Management District Plan as the Owners Association. That means that they will oversee, manage, and implement all aspects of the TBID. What's important here is that businesses assessed will include lodging, retail, restaurants, and recreation providers. Not all TBIDs assess businesses beyond lodging, but a good example of a community that does is Mammoth. They were one of the first to pass a TBID that actually assessed businesses other than lodging. They do assess lodging, but they go beyond that. And so this proposed TBID would do the same, thus spreading the burden and the cost of closing that gap across different businesses versus putting it all on lodging, which is what an increase in transient occupancy tax would do. The impacts to residents, the estimates are anywhere between $25 to $30 annually. Of course, that will vary depending on how much time you spend in restaurants in Eastern Placer County and other businesses, but nonetheless, our estimates are that the impacts to locals will be minimal. The funds will also be locally controlled by the board representing those businesses. So the board of the Resort Association will evolve consistent with the board structure that's outlined in the management district plan, and I'll go into more detail on that in a moment. The TBID will have a 5-year life and can be renewed for a 10-year period after that initial 5-year period. Placer County will collect the TBID revenues, and we will remit those revenues to the Resort Association. These are the TBID boundaries. I think this is important to describe to you a little bit of the specifics on zones 1 and 2, which are outlined in the management district plan as well. So you'll see the orange color there, which is in the Tahoe Basin, is zone 1. The purple area is zone 2. Zone 1 and Zone 2 is important because it differentiates within lodging itself the percent assessment that will be added on to a guest's bill. So if you are in Zone 1 or staying in the basin, the proposed assessment would be 2%. If you are staying in Zone 2 or within the purple area, you would be at a 1% assessment. And I will speak a little bit more provide more detail on what the additional funds generated in Zone 1 will do and who will make decisions around how those funds will be spent. This is some additional detail on how the TBID works. As I mentioned, assessment on lodging will vary between 1% and 2% depending on where the lodge is located. The assessment on food and beverage and retail will be 1%, and then the assessment on activities will also be 1%. The only exception here is for food and beverage, retail, or activity providers. If their gross revenue each year is less than $150,000, then they will pay a $250 fee into the assessment. This was put in place to minimize impacts to small business, to give them an option that was workable for them, and this was per conversations with many of those small business owners in the community when this was being developed. As I mentioned earlier, the Resort Association board and its configuration will vary or will change slightly. You'll see here at the top, this infographic outlines the board seats that will comprise the Owners Association for the TBID. You'll notice there are seats for many of our resort partners, but there are also at-large seats, as well as representatives from our business associations in Olympic Valley, as well as Tahoe City and Kings Beach. All 3 of those organizations represent many of our small businesses in Eastern Placer County and will have a seat at the table in ensuring, overseeing, and making decisions on the allocation of those funds and the management of the TBID itself. You'll also notice that there are a seat for activity businesses, food and beverage, among others. So the Resort Association wanted to ensure that there is a broad cross-section here, representatives from the various business types that will be assessed in making decisions and overseeing the TBID itself. You'll also notice, however, that it doesn't stop there, that the Resort Association will create an advisory committee that will have representatives from our resorts as well as Zone 1, which is along the basin, and then 4 to 6 at-large members. So I've heard comments from members of the community about engagement with the Resort Association, and as you can see, there are many opportunities for people to participate on these boards and committees. I'll also mention Zone 1 Advisory Committee to the right, you'll see. This is the committee that will oversee the additional funds that are generated at the Lake Tahoe Basin within Zone 1, and they will make decisions about how those funds are spent. Now, keep in mind that the management district plan does specify how the funds should be spent. So the organization can't deviate from that. There can be changes to budgetary line items up to 15% of the total budget, but for the most part, the budget is what it is, and the allocation of those funds are already determined, and businesses have had a chance to review this management district plan prior to signing petitions. Here is a little bit on the TBID budget details. You can see this is out of the management district plan itself. We are projecting revenue at $6 million a year, and you can see the breakdown in how those revenues will be spent. The largest chunk of the pie there, $3.1 million, is marketing, promotions, and special events. I do want to point out that is roughly the amount of money that the Resort Association uses today to fund its marketing program. So while this is a large chunk of the total pie, it is not an increase over the marketing that the organization currently does in the community. Additional services, however, will be provided that they don't provide today and will be funded by the TBID. So you'll notice that there's a business advocacy and support, the green pie there, at about $330,000. And I do want to mention that in the management district plan, it does go into detail on what could be spent in these category areas, how the funds can be used to support business advocacy, to support business in the community. You'll also notice Zone 1, specific services, almost $900,000. I mentioned to you in the prior slide that there will be a special committee formed of businesses located in the Tahoe Basin to determine how these funds are spent and to oversee those expenditures as they move forward. Economic development, transportation, and other opportunities are almost $500,000. And then sustainability and mitigation of tourism at close to $200,000 is included. And these line items came out of many conversations with business leaders in the community. And resort representatives were a big part of that, but so were many other business leaders as well. So I want to make sure that that's clear. I've read some public comment about it being resort driven, and while our resort partners are hugely important and major partners of this is also many businesses in our community, small, medium, large, that have participated and have informed how the TBID ultimately looks. I also wanted to break down the TBID revenue by business type. This was asked in a couple of public meetings previously, and so I wanted to make sure it was included. Over $6 million, as I mentioned, is projected in TBID revenue on an annual basis. From lodging, we anticipate about 45% of that $6 million will come from lodging businesses within the district itself. 39% will come from food and beverage and retail, and about 16% will come from recreation or activity providers. The other thing I think is important to highlight regarding the TBID is day visits and day visitors. When you come to Tahoe and you stay at a hotel, you pay transient occupancy tax, and your board has continued to invest those dollars in eastern Placer County. When we have day visitors come up, it's our experience that they don't spend as much money in the community, they're not contributing to transient occupancy tax, they don't spend as much in businesses or in restaurants and retail as individuals who stay overnight in our hotels and our vacation rentals, etc. So by spreading the TBID out across a variety of business sectors, it gives us the opportunity to engage with day visitors and for them to also contribute to closing the gap in Eastern Placer so that we can implement priorities. And here is here is a video which will describe the timeline informing the TBID, which I also think is important for your board to hear as well as for members of the public. And with that, I will cue the video. There should be audio.
I could sing.
I know. I could sing too.
Let's see if we can restart it and get the audio.
Okay. If not, we can run it through and then I can speak to it or narrate if I need to. But I think this is important because this has been discussed for a long time. There have been a lot of public meetings and discussions, and I think it's important to convey that to your board as well as the public, what the timeline has been to form the district and to get us to where we are today. And so you can see reference there to the initial tourism master plan from 1994, again renewed in 2004 and 2015. And then several public meetings and conversations as far back as 2016 and 17 on a TBID. In 2018, we conducted a voter survey in Eastern Placer County to determine whether or not there would be an appetite from voters to support specifically a transient occupancy tax increase or a sales tax increase. We'll just go with it. I'm just going to go ahead and narrate it.
We're still troubleshooting. I'm so sorry. We're still troubleshooting through it.
That's fine. I'll go ahead and talk through it if that's all right. And if they get it to work, great. And if not, we can just move on. It's no problem. Anyhow, in 2018, we completed a voter survey, and there was significant support. In fact, over 80% of those polled supported an increase in TOT between 2 and 4%, beyond where we are today. So we're at 10%. It seemed that voters were willing to support a TOT rate at 12 or 14%. We also polled sales tax to determine the support for that. There was support there, but not as significant as our transient occupancy tax. But what that told us is that people in the community were willing to support an increase or an additional revenue stream to support our priorities. The TBID came into place because it achieved the same goals, but again, didn't just put all of that on one industry as TOT typically does. It spreads it across multiple industries. And it also engages the business community and business leaders in a way that an increase in transient occupancy tax would not do. So those business leaders that are being assessed have the opportunity to sit at the table on the board making decisions and ensuring that the TBID is being managed appropriately. You'll see here, I'll also point out that the TBID, the Resort Association, developed a TBID landing page back in 2019. They also began circulating petitions early in 2020. Those petitions included a robust packet of information, which I shared with your board in the January public meeting. The Resort Association ceased its efforts on the petition drive after COVID hit to be somewhat sensitive to the business community and some of the challenges that they were facing, and then reinitiated the process in the fall, and were able to successfully collect enough petitions to bring it forward to your board in December. So you can see this is a fairly lengthy timeline, and within it are some key points and thresholds around planning, community engagement, and then bringing items forward to your board. So this has been ongoing for quite some time. And with that, we'll just go ahead and move on. Oops. Okay. It's a great video, by the way, and so it's really well done. So we can post it. I know it's available on the Resort Association's website, and I can work with our Public Information Office to make it available as well to those who have interest, and certainly send it to your board if you'd like to watch. It's a short video, but a great comprehensive review of the steps and process to get us to today.
Yeah, I think if you could get that to us, we'd all appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks. Will do. So for competitive destinations, I handed this out to your board at the last public meeting. I thought it was important to incorporate in this slide. We've heard a lot about, certainly with COVID, concerns around marketing, and we don't need more marketing in the community. I wanted to point out that the Resort Association's budget, as it compares to other competitive destinations or comparable destinations, is much lower. So you can see Mammoth, which is not far away, a competitor of ours, is spending almost $9 million a year on their marketing. That's significant. The Resort Association right now is under $4 million. You can also see Park City is close to that $9 million mark. South Lake Tahoe is over $7 million. Napa and Sonoma between $7 and $9 million. So significantly more than what the organization currently receives and is able to invest in order to support the tourism economy of our community. Even with the TBID revenues, which will put them closer to $6 million, they become more competitive, but they're still not quite with the competitive set. So I think that's important context to set for your board as well as the public. I also wanted to mention the surrounded jurisdictions' sales tax rates. I've heard a lot from certain community members concerns about the increased costs that they will incur when they go to a restaurant in Placer County or in eastern Placer County where the assessment will be placed. And I wanted to point out what Placer County's current sales tax rate is, which is 7.25%, and then show you the comparisons of other surrounding jurisdictions and communities, as well as some of our competitive set communities. So you'll notice, and I'll just point out a few here, South Lake Tahoe is at 7.75%, Mammoth is the same. Squaw Valley has a little bit higher sales tax rate. Truckee is at 8.25%. So our neighbor right next door is have a much higher sales tax percentage. Washoe County and Reno are the same, 8.265, so they're a little bit higher than Truckee. And I will add that many of us who live in Eastern Placer or the town of Truckee go to Reno quite a bit to make purchases there. And so many of us are paying a higher sales tax rate when we go down into those communities to do so than we would be paying in Eastern Placer. So what I wanted to point out, a couple other things. Groceries and gas will not be assessed. So I've mentioned that before, but I want to make sure it's clear to your board and the public. So if you take our current sales tax rate and you add a 1% assessment, then someone would be paying potentially 8.25%, which is the equivalent of what's being paid in Reno, is still less than sales tax in Reno and the same as the town of Truckee. So it's still less expensive than going to Reno, which many of us do anyhow, to purchase groceries, to get food, to buy, well, not groceries, but a variety of other things, going to Target, going to whatever stores down there to make purchases that are harder to make in Eastern Placer at times. Surrounding jurisdictions TOT rates, the lodging assessment, as I mentioned, is 1% to 2%. Eastern Placer is currently at 10%, and you'll see we are the lowest of many of our surrounding jurisdictions and areas that are our competitors as well, which is why I've included Breckenridge and Crested Butte for your review. So Truckee's at 12%, Washoe County and Reno at 13 to 13.5%, South Lake Tahoe is at 12 to 14%. So you'll see that we're at a much lower rate. And so there is some capacity there. If you think about that, and then you think back to what I mentioned on the survey that we did, and the interest and the support from members of the community to increase our current TOT rate, there is definitely capacity in there to increase. And so in order to do that, rather than increasing TOT, we are pursuing the TBID. So if you're a lodge and you are, let's say you want to stay out at North Star at a vacation rental property there, the current percent is 10%. If we add a 1% assessment, someone would be paying the equivalent of 11%. That is still cheaper than the town of Truckee and many other surrounding areas in terms of the rate that you would be charged. You're staying at the lakeside, it's an increased percentage at 2%, so you would be paying 12%, which is the same as some of our surrounding jurisdictions or less than. So I just wanted to point that out as well. As I mentioned, the Management District Plan, which is attached, is the governing document for the TBID and includes the budget that I've highlighted, governance details, board membership, committee membership, and assessment details. It identifies the Resort Association as the Owners Association. There are minor revisions in the document that was originally created that are included in your board packet, so you have a redlined version. Most of the changes are to dates, because when this document was developed, we expected the TBID might be formed sooner, but when COVID hit, we slowed things down and things have been delayed. So we thought it was important to go back and make some of those minor adjustments, but there's nothing material, no material changes are in there. It also includes the list of businesses that will be part of the district and will be assessed as outlined in the document itself. And today's requested board action does include approval of the revised document as presented to your board today. A little bit of community feedback to the Resort Association as they began to form the TBID and come up with the Management District Plan elements itself. Resort Association met with several businesses in the community in North Lake Tahoe to discuss the TBID, as I mentioned in that timeline, as far back as 2 years ago, to really start those conversations. And those discussions informed the way the Management District Plan looks today and the TBID budget itself. The feedback also shaped the multi-year agreement, which I'm going to start talking about here shortly, between the Resort Association and Placer County, which is another important component of the TBID. So it's separate from the TBID, but they're very closely connected and they rely on each other. And so I want to spend some time talking about that with your board and the community as well. I did want to highlight some of the businesses and business leaders that have supported the TBID. And you'll see here that we've got members that have supported the TBID, restaurant owners like Douglas Dale, Katie and Kevin Hickey that operate Tahoe Adventure Company, so activity providers, Bill and Kelly Dietz, these are a management property company, Tahoe Luxury Properties, Dave Wilderotter from Tahoe Dave's, Melissa Sig from Tahoe Tap House. There are many businesses that support this, but I thought it was important to highlight this for you. Again, our resort partners are supportive, have been engaged, but there are other business leaders and business representatives that strongly support the TBID and have been a part of our process since day one. Now, moving on to the freed up TOT. When the Resort Association began talking with businesses, one of the questions that business leaders asked was, well, you get the TBID revenue in, that's now going to pay for all your operations, your efforts. What happens to the TOT that has been funding your contract for over 2 decades? Does that go away? Does that continue to be invested in Eastern Placer? And if so, what are the priority areas? So based on those conversations, the Resort Association proposed a multi-year agreement with Placer County. One, to designate those dollars, which we refer to as freed up TOT, because the TBID revenues are essentially freeing them up for a different use, that those funds would continue to be invested in Eastern Placer County and more specifically would support transportation and workforce housing priorities in our community. Again, that came directly from businesses, feedback to the Resort Association, and was very important in getting business support for that TBID. So again, it's separate but very connected and very important component of the TBID itself. The agreement to codify those things, so codify the allocation of the TOT to Eastern Placer, to ensure that it was focused on transportation and workforce housing, we came up with a multi-year agreement that your board approved in January of 2020. It also designated the Resort Association as the organization that would recommend to your board how that freed up TOT would be spent on an annual basis, specific to workforce housing and transportation initiatives. The other thing I want to mention is in fiscal year 1920, we had a pretty significant fund balance to the Tahoe Tourism and Promotions Fund. So that is 60% of all TOT generated in Eastern Placer goes in and supports that fund. Large fund balance, and we had conversations with the Resort Association to talk about how those funds should be spent. And through those discussions, it was agreed upon and included in that agreement that your board would look to the Resort Association for guidance on how to allocate that fund balance as well. So not only the freed up TOT moving forward, but the fund balance from 1920. And that's important because I'm going to request your board approve the allocation of a percentage of those dollars to several tourism mitigating projects in just a moment. The agreement is contingent upon the formation of the TBID itself, and it will commence, the agreement will commence when the TBID is formed and end 5 years from the date that the TBID is formed. So it goes along the same timeline as the TBID itself, but it may be extended if the TBID is extended after a 5-year period. The Resort Association Board approved the original agreement in January of 2019, and then the revised agreement, which is part of your board packet, on March 1st, 2021. Now, the changes to the document are not significant. They're largely dates, again, because your board approved this in 2020 in January before COVID. Things slowed down, so we just did a little bit of cleanup, nothing material, but it is in your board packet, and that will be a requested action today, is that your board approve those changes. Now, on to transportation and tourism mitigating projects and services. And I do want to point out the funding source for this requested action are 1920 TOT fund balance dollars. That is not the same as freed up TOT, of course. However, this does demonstrate how that freed up TOT could be used in the future to support transportation, workforce housing, and other tourism mitigating services in priority areas. I will also add that without the formation of the TBID, this recommendation would likely not be presented to your board today. I do want to add the Resort Association Board approved this recommendation contingent on your board's approval of the TBID itself. So if the TBID doesn't move forward, then this recommendation would be pulled back, and then the Resort Association would probably reconsider how the funds might be spent, how they would recommend the funds be spent to your board. All projects and services that I've outlined in the staff report as well as in this presentation would be implemented as early as spring 2021. And TBID revenues that will be freed up in future years could support services like these projects, as I mentioned. So here's the list of projects and services that we would like to initiate this summer. and get moving on as quickly as we can, as well as the estimated costs to implement these projects and programs. Micro shuttle transit is at the top, microtransit shuttle, I should say, at $450,000 a year. Currently, the Downtowner provides microtransit service. This is on-demand transit service in Olympic Valley and Alpine Meadows. That is funded by an existing TBID there. And it has been incredibly successful. The ridership has been much greater than they expected it. It is a tremendous resource and asset, not only to visitors, but to residents who use it. So we would like to expand that service into the Placer County portion of the Lake Tahoe Basin to include Kings Beach, Tahoe City, and all the way along the West Shore. We've had conversations with the Downtowner. They are very interested in working with us. We believe that their success in Olympic Valley and Alpine Meadows will translate to the basin. I will also tell you that because we've been having these discussions, the town of Truckee as well as South Lake are interested in expanding microtransit into their communities as well. So this could be a resource for residents, myself. I'm going to hop on microtransit and get around town. You can put your bike on the back. It's going to be great. Or if you're coming into the community as a visitor, you stay at a hotel or a vacation rental, you can use your phone. Within 15 minutes, they'll pick you up and take you wherever you'd like to go within their boundaries at no cost to the rider. So a tremendous resource. This will help us address some of our BMT issues, our greenhouse gas goals, and provide a much better service for our residents and visitors alike. In addition, this includes expanded park and ride. We have started a park and ride program a couple of years ago in the winter months. So the way this works is we utilize parking sites in Truckee. People park their vehicles. We provide transit service to those locations and take people to wherever they like to go, primarily to the lake. We have also offered this in the summer months. We did a pilot on the 3rd and 4th of July a couple of years ago, and we only had 2 weeks to promote it, and the ridership was amazing. It was great. We really had not much time, and we were very impressed with how many people actually used it. People don't want to drive their cars when they're going to get stuck in traffic for hours. The idea of hopping on a bus, getting to your site, hopping on it, getting back, and not getting caught in that traffic is very appealing to people. So we'd like to expand this program. And you can see how some of these programs will work together well. So imagine parking your vehicle in Truckee, riding TART into the basin, and then getting on microtransit and navigating all through the basin, however, whenever you want. And I do want to add microtransit would be available from 8 a.m. to midnight. That's the current proposal, 7 days a week through the summer. So you could park your vehicle in Truckee and take public transit to experience North Lake Tahoe and then take the bus back to your vehicle. So you wouldn't have to take your own car the whole time, which could be a huge benefit to residents and visitors alike. Enhanced trash and litter service. This is to work with a group called Clean Tahoe. They've done a lot of work in South Lake. We've heard a lot from the community about trash and litter issues. This has been ongoing, but certainly something your board, I know, has heard a lot about and was exacerbated by COVID. So this will give us the opportunity to work with them. They would be on call 7 days a week and would be able to respond when there are issues with overflowing trash bins, dumpsters, and pick up large pieces of trash as well. So there's interest from some other public agencies in partnering with us on this, including the Conservancy as well as state parks, which is also very exciting. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to implement this by this summer and have enhanced trash service in our community. Pedestrian crossing guards, something we did last year with success at areas where we have a lot of people trying to cross. It impacts traffic flows, so they platoon pedestrians and then allow them to cross every minute or every minute and a half or so. And it really does help with traffic flow. So we'd like to implement that program again. Also a temporary signal at Grove Street in Tahoe City. This is a crossing that has created a lot of challenges. It is heavily used by pedestrians. It slows traffic significantly. We'd like to address the intersection. Caltrans would prefer us to signalize that intersection and we've had some community feedback over the years that have some concerns about that. So a temporary signal gives us the chance to program it a variety of ways, to test it to see which setting makes the most sense and to get community buy-in, and then determine how we want to proceed permanently in that area into the future. So that's what that would include. A changeable message sign, 15,000. We had a lot of needs for these in the last few years. We've borrowed them from different agencies. We've rented them. I think it's time that we have one that we can use to communicate a variety of messages to our visitors and residents, whether it be on public safety, public health, traffic, etc. And then expanded trail snow removal. I'm getting so excited. I'm getting ahead of myself, you guys. Expanded trail snow removal. We already fund the Tahoe City PUD and Olympic Valley Public Services District to provide this service. We'd like to expand it beyond the current trails that we have. We have more in our inventory now. We have more miles. There's more demand. The town of Truckee is committed to clearing all of its Class 1 bike trails. And so there is that expectation from the public that we keep up with that. And so this gives us the opportunity to expand our current program to include the trails that are new in our inventory so that people can utilize those trails in the winter months as well. So the total request is $1.1 million to support all of these projects, which, as I mentioned, we would get moving on implementing by the summer ASAP should your board approve the TBID as well as this recommendation. So I've got up here the requested board action. I'm going to stop talking and see if you have any questions for me. I know Jeffrey Hentz is here from the Resort Association. I'm sure he'd like to say a few words. And I know there are other members of the public that have some comments and feedback to provide to your board as well. So thank you very much.
Great and enthusiastic presentation.
Thank you.
Bonnie had her light on first, so. Bonnie.
I just have a quick question. Thank you, Erin. As far as the assessment at the point of sale, if a business chose to not pass that 1% or 2%, barely 1%, onto their customers, could they choose to take that assessment and pay it themselves?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
That allows flexibility. They wouldn't actually have to charge their own customers if they chose not to.
Right.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Cindy, did you
I
have some interest?
I have some interest, and I had a couple questions. So one is, when the survey was done on TOT rates with our local community, did not the county also survey on sales tax?
Yes.
And do you remember those numbers?
Yeah, so it would have been a special tax if we were to propose, the way we talked about it in that survey, the sales tax, because it would have been focused on certain priorities, transportation and housing, and so we would have needed a high threshold to pass it. We were at 64% roughly, so just below what would be required to pass a special tax. So we had some work to do there, but we weren't there, and so we would not have been comfortable moving forward at that point in time with the sales tax initiative based on those results.
And that would have been that the survey was done with local voters.
Correct.
And yet almost 2/3 supported a 1% for these types of programs.
Correct.
Because that was what was tested, correct?
That's right.
So I know we've had a lot of public comment on that issue and the situation that we're currently in addition to the other rates that you showed.
Yep.
That many of us get to pay when we need larger items. We don't buy a lot of refrigerators in downtown Tahoe City, so we do tend to go to Reno and Washoe County for some of our larger items.
Or Auburn. You two can.
I know, it just delivery kills you on that. Although, now that I come up and down a lot,
There you go.
I can start my own shuttle service. The other item I wanted to bring up is on the recreation and activity providers. So on slide, I think it's 15 of your presentation. I think the thing that I have heard so many surprises from the public on.
I'll get there.
Yeah, that's okay. It's the TBID revenue by
Yep.
business type.
Yes.
Right. And one of the items I've heard from so many community members is they did not realize there was not any form of local taxation on things such as ski lift tickets, boat rentals, bike rentals,
Correct.
rafting trips on the river, those sorts of things. And although you're showing only 16% of the revenue coming from this, part of that is because, well, let me go back. I believe the last study showed that recreation was actually the #1 area of expenditure of visitors.
Correct.
We currently don't have a means to create any revenue to address the impacts of those businesses, so the TBID allowed that flexibility, but it's so much less. And I think I may be correct, and I forgot to ask you this before. because we excluded the ski passes,
Correct.
this revenue doesn't look as much.
Right.
And the reason for that was that the ski passes are good at multiple destinations throughout the country, throughout the world, and so we just went for day lift tickets. Is
Right,
that
as
correct?
opposed to season passes, which is a significant portion of the revenue that our ski resorts receive. But nowadays, the season passes have changed significantly, and they're good at multiple resorts, not only in the state or in the country, but globally. And so it becomes difficult for them to determine what percentage of that lift ticket or that ski pass should be attributed to people in Eastern Placer County, for example, and then to carve out some percentage of that to then pay the assessment back. It would have been too difficult logistically to do. And so the ski resorts were committing to day passes only because they could attribute those purchases to people in Eastern Placer at those resorts within Eastern Placer.
But those that did support us include food and beverage and retail as a good portion of their revenue, so they're caught in that category above.
Yep.
I think, as I recall, this number is a real guesstimate because we don't currently collect any revenues from these, and so it really was the wildest card in the assumptions that went into this, and it could be more than this one.
It could, yep.
16%. So with that, if there is more money collected in the TBID than you anticipate, or less, how does the budget get adjusted? Do you know?
You know, that's a good question, and I have John Lambeth on the call, and so I'd like to ask him maybe to respond to that question.
Thank you, Erin, and Supervisor Gustafson. Your question relates to how the estimates were done for the activity providers?
I thought it was an estimate because we didn't currently track any data from those. But secondly, what happens if we're under or over in our budget assumption, I guess is the more relevant point.
Yeah. It was an estimate. It was done by NLTRA, but the plan stands based on the rates. So the actual amount to be collected for all businesses is an estimate, and if that is over or under, and we would expect these numbers to fluctuate, right? As business increases, those numbers will go up. As business decreases, we would expect those numbers to go down. The rate will be the same, but the actual amount collected we would expect to fluctuate. So the budget will fluctuate with those numbers as the economy fluctuates and as those individual business revenues numbers fluctuate.
Great, thank you. But the categories will stay relatively the same.
That's correct.
Okay, great. And then one other comment I've heard is the timing on this and the concern about the businesses as if we're imposing this on the businesses versus the businesses asking us for this. And I think I just want clarification that the businesses understand the timeline. That's what they agreed to with those that supported it.
Yes.
And move forward. And then my final item goes back to a presentation we had before you arrived today, which was on our mid-year financials and where we're at in TOT collections and what we're anticipating in those. And it's a very positive report for Placer County. As we know, we've been very busy. And so in looking at those numbers, I know that some businesses have been dramatically impacted. And we have tried to help in so many ways and done more than most counties have in helping our businesses. But I think it might be important for our staff to get that slide up if we have public comment on it. And that was slide 4 of Daniel's presentation. If we might, if we want to pull that back up later, if we get public comment, just to make sure the public knows we are monitoring where we're at in both sales tax and TOT for the county.
Sounds good. Great.
Thank you.
I have a question based on that. Do we know what proportion of ski tickets are these annual multi-place tickets as compared to a day ticket? And is there a trend that's distinct? Are the new annual passes expanding as a proportion of the total sales, or?
Yeah, I don't know the percentage of sales for season passes versus day passes. That's something I'd have to look into, talk to some of the resort partners on. I do know, though, that with the model really changing, that's become a significant portion of their revenue. More people are buying season passes, especially those when they're consolidating, and so you have more options with your season pass to ski elsewhere. And so many people, I'm speaking anecdotally at this point, I don't have specific data in front of me, but I do know that the vast majority of people, certainly in my community, are buying season passes now as opposed to day passes because they're good at multiple resorts. And again, not just in our community, but outside of the community and globally. Day passes are still a significant portion, though, of their revenue, and we believe that, based on our estimates, that it will still have a meaningful contribution to the TBID. But the exact percentages themselves, I'd have to do some research on and get back to you on that question.
And I don't know that they'll share that.
Yeah.
It is pretty much an industry, and they're very competitive with each other. I know in discussions, that's pretty closely
Yes.
guarded information.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. That's it with your presentation?
That's it.
No more board questions at this point, so why don't we go ahead and open it up to the public for questions and comments, and please come forward and just state your name for the record, and we'll take it from there.
Mr. Chair, just for the record, this is a public hearing on the TBID formation, not
Thank
just
you.
public comment.
So we will open up the public hearing officially.
Can I be the first public participant? Thank you. I have a slide deck, as my predecessor had, and Megan said I'm not permitted to project it. Is that correct? Okay. Have you got, you're nice enough to make copies? Yes. I just have one, no, I haven't. It's, one slide is in color.
We put it in color.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity